The world we live in is to be protected by all as it sustains both plant and animal life. Maintaining an equilibrium, environmentalists say, is necessary in ensuring an adequate number of resources for all organisms. This, therefore, implies that conservation efforts must be embraced by all people across communities, nations, and continents of the world. On this edition of Frontiers, we will be turning attention to illegal wildlife trade, a harmful activity which is giving conservationists, environmentalists, and other stakeholders great concern. I am Frama Panyi. Our guest is Benga Kolawole, Head Conservation Monitoring National Environmental Standards and Regulations Enforcement Agency, NESRA. Glad to have you join us on the program.
It's my pleasure.
We will take an excerpt to chart the course of today's discuss.
$2.5 tons, approximately 2,436.15 kilograms, and 9 billion naira worth of these animal parts are being destroyed, sending a very strong message, particularly to wildlife traffickers and traders trading in prohibited animal parts.
In Africa, elephants are a symbol of majesty and greatness, but they are slaughtered for their ivory, which is then illegally traded across the world.
Only last year, the National Environmental Standards Regulation and Enforcement Agency, NESRA, incinerated seized pangolin scales, pythons, and crocodiles, and pulverized elephant tusk and worked ivory as a demonstration of Nigeria's commitment to the provisions of multilateral environmental agreements, protocols, conventions, and treaties to which it is a signatory.
Most of these items are not gotten from Nigeria. We have some, but some of them are trafficked through Nigeria, giving our nation a very bad name. So with this exercise, it's going to send a very strong signal.
It's extremely important, and it's a great message to show wildlife traffickers, people who would bring elephant ivory into the country, to know that it's going to get seized and it's going to be destroyed and you're not going to make any money.
Minister of State for Environment, Isiaq Salako, takes the issue of endangered species and crimes against wildlife seriously, and Nigeria being a major transit hub for these illegal wildlife trafficking is not going down well with the ministry, NESRA, and their partners.
Nigeria is sending very, very clear signal, unambiguous, that the government of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu will not tolerate illegal wild crimes.
The most recent African elephant status report estimates that about 415,000 elephants remain in Africa today, compared to over 1.3 million elephants found in the continent in 1979 and only 400 found in Nigeria today.
Once again, you're welcome to Frontiers.
Thank you.
Now let's get straight into the business of the day. Now there is the need to not only protect the environment, but also conserve wildlife. What efforts are being put in place in this regard in Nigeria?
The name of my agency has been mentioned, National Environmental Standards and Regulations Enforcement Agency. As the name implies, it's an enforcement agency on environmental matters. Our job is simple. It's just to enforce anything that is called law, anything that is policy, anything that is guidelines, anything that is regulations. So, and we have some of these policies, law, protocols, regulations, guidelines. We have them both at local level and international level. So we have the international environmental agreements, protocols, conventions, and treaties. Same thing, some of these protocols, agreements, conventions, and treaties have been domesticated because Nigeria is a party to those international agreements. And it is a responsibility of every country who is a party to those international environmental agreements to have those agreements domesticated in their country. That is to say, to bring down the provisions of those agreements as it applies to their own environments and whatever the ecosystem is constituted of. So, and in this context, we have a Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, Wildlife, of Wild Fauna and Flora. So that is CITES. And CITES has been domesticated in Nigeria as far back as 1985. After it was signed, Nigeria signed CITES as far back as 1973-74. They call it Washington Convention. So not until 1985 before Nigeria could domesticate it. And that is to say, to bring that context into our localities, what they have at international level, what are those things that are similar to that in Nigeria that is different from the general international provisions. And so that convention was domesticated with the act that was established in 1985 called Endangered Species Control of International Trade Act. So this was the first law that we have in Nigeria to domesticate CITES. And not until 2011, after the coming of my agency, the agency came on board in 2007. And as of 2011, we were able to, again, complement the existing ESA, that is the Act, by promulgating or developing regulations. And this regulation was named or was gazetted as the National Environmental Protection of Endangered Species in International Trade, Regulation 2011. So these two national laws and regulations basically meant to protect our wildlife, especially those that have been listed to be endangered. That is, their populations in the wild has really gone down. And if care is not taken, they will go into extinction. We will not see them again. So to control them against unlawful international trade. So these are the first efforts areas that were made to ensure that our endangered species are not are protected against international trade or unlawful act for commercial reasons.
Now, threat, or extinction of wildlife is a global concern. And there are environmental laws and multilateral environmental agreements, as you've just mentioned some, protocols, conventions, and treaties, Can you let us into some of these treaties that Nigeria is a signatory to?
When we talk of biological resources, I've mentioned CITES.
Yes.
When we have also Convention on Biodiversity, we call that one CBD. We have Convention on Migratory Species, CMS. And like some of these conventions, they have their protocols. Now, protocols is also an international document that was agreed upon. But it is not as wide as in what constitutes protocol is not as wide as the conventions and treaties. So, for instance, African nations, they can decide to come together and say, from the convention, let's look at our peculiarity. What is it that is common to us in Africa? So let's agree on it as an Africa, so that it's not just about the convention, because convention is international and It's all about the global. It's all about the whole world. But we now, here in Africa, we have elephants. It's common to us in Africa. You can't find, maybe you can't find that in Europe. We have pangolins common to us in Africa. We have rhinoceros common to us in Africa. So what can we do to bring out a more stringent provisions compared to the conventions? So that is protocol at that level. Then after the protocol, then you have the national laws. So like CBD, we do have Nagoya Protocol, we do have Kochi Protocol. So Nagoya Protocol is a protocol that that was put in place to control issue of access to genetic resources in Africa. So because we are not an industrialized nation yet, but those industrialized countries, if they have to come to our nation, Africa, to use some of our products, then what is going to be our benefits from the usage of that products or our biological resources? So that is what the Nagoya Protocol is all about. So we have protocols, we have conventions, we have treaties. Sometimes they are just like semantics. So, but anything, treaties, if you call it protocols, if you call it conventions, call it agreements, they are multilateral. They are things that join countries or nations together. So,
what is this collaboration like, with some of these bodies, these international bodies you've mentioned? What is it like working with them?
Well, there are no international bodies at this level, but there are other countries of the nations. Nations of the world. Sorry, permit me. So the collaboration, the collaboration is more with the nation that you are having similar things to protect. Like Nigeria, we want to collaborate with Cameroon because we share border, and along the corridors of our borders, we have elephants that is common to us. We have pangolins that is common to us. We have species of trees that are common to us. So that is where we collaborate. So that is on that context we collaborate. And when you go to Africa at large, we collaborate on issue of elephants because elephants are found, across the world of African nations. So that at that level, once you have a country that's having something similar to you, like I told you, Nagoya Protocol. So we have genetic resources, biological resources that are common to us in Africa in terms of fauna, that is animal, and flora, which is plant. So that is area we want to collaborate. Protocol that has to do with issue of chemical and the rest of it. Very green and very habitable. Having a good canopy. Yeah. Understand? So what type of chemicals do we want to? Oh, sorry, that has to do with Basel Convention and the rest of. What type of chemical do we want to allow in Nigeria or in Africa that will not be destructive to our environment? So we have some of these things at that level to collaborate among ourselves. Then when it gets to the larger world, then that is when we discuss, please, the West, we will not like the West to come in this regard to assess social things from Africa, but rather, this is our laws, these are our do's and don'ts. So please, if you want to come to Africa to assess, this is what we have agreed in Nigeria. And it's more of mutual consent between nations of the world.
Mr. Kolawole, we'll take a short break now. We will come back and continue the discussion. This is Forntiers, and we're taking a look at the illegal wildlife trade. The conversation continues shortly. Glad to know you're still there. The discussion continues. Let's pick up from where we stopped before we went on the break. Now, you mentioned CITES earlier. You know, CITES trade, at a point, Nigeria was suspended from being a part of that trade, but it was lifted, the suspension was lifted, of course, in 2011, of course, through a well-coordinated effort of Interagency Committee on CITES enforcement in Nigeria. Can you tell us what led to this suspension?
The Honorable Minister of Environment, when we carried out the national project in the disposal of the ivories that are under the custody of the agency, he did write in his keynote address how Nigeria was suspended, and it is not anything other than the gaps that was there in the enforcement of our wildlife laws that led to, excessiveness in the trade of our wildlife species in Africa or in Nigeria, and these products are being traded across the ports and border posts of the country, going into the Western world, Asian part of the nation of the world, without any regulations. And the convention does not allow that, because why? Before anything can move out of a particular country to another country, the provision by CITES is that the country of origin must be able to issue a permit on that thing that is meant to be traded upon across the ports and borders of the country to another nation. So where those things are done unlawfully or illegally, that is without all these permits, permission and issuance of permit, then it calls for concern. So for so many years before the suspension came about, that was around 2006, thereabouts. Because as 2011, it was 6 years with the suspension in international trade to Nigeria. So before that time, suspension came on board, the nations, societies, they have discovered the lacuna in our enforcement. That these things are just moving out of the country without any permits, and it seems not to be regulated. So, and to discourage that, that was the reason why Nigeria was placed on suspension, that anything that comes from Nigeria will not be acceptable in any part of the world as relates to animal products or plant products. So until 2011, after the coming of the agency, before Nigeria was created or established, Nigeria used to have FEPA, Federal Environmental Protection Agency. It was FEPA that was metamorphosized into Ministry of Environment in 1999. So between 1999 and the time of creation of Nigeria, the enforcement of relevant environmental or wildlife laws was almost totally at zero level. Because Ministry of Environment is a policy organ of government, policy maker.
Yeah.
So there was no distinguished enforcement arm of government on this issue of wildlife for that period, between 1999 and 2007 when NTA was created. So within that period, we had that gap. So that was what led to the suspension. So after the coming of the agency in 2007, then so the agency had to look at this issue, because we can't continue in that line. It does, of course, put the nation in the dark,
bad light,
the dark situations among the nations of the world. So what can we do to have our seat back in the Committee of CITES? So that was what led to all those actions that were taken then. And through the good collaboration between the agency and the Honorable Minister of Environment then, so we're able to come up with the strategies. Among those strategies before the regulation came on board was how to relate with the World Secretariat to CITES, the National Secretariat of CITES in Geneva, and to consult the Secretariat. These are the things Nigeria wants to put in place and how we want to put in place. So we related with the agency, related with the Secretariat then, and we were able to come up with some of those strategies, like the development of the regulation I said earlier on.
Yeah.
And the regulation was sent to the Secretariat for them to peruse it, vet it, and look at the standards. This regulation was called at Category 1.
Oh.
And after then the CITES Secretariat delegates were invited to Nigeria to come and conduct workshop to interagency committee that were formed that time. And that committee comprised of course, Nigeria was the chairman then of that committee, under the supervision of the Honorable Minister of Environment, and comprised some of the other organizations that have mandates that relates to environment and at the same time enforcement. So this committee we carried out mass what we call mass shisha raid of corners where people are illegally trading on some of this wildlife, just to show to the world the seriousness of the nation. And on that note, we were eventually granted a lifted or suspension of the...
All right. Now, Nigeria has been identified as one of the 4 poaching hubs in Africa and also a major transit hub, for illegal wildlife trafficking due to its porous nature of, nations' international borders. Can you briefly, quickly summarize to us what measures are being put in place to address this headlong trouble?
We have National Stakeholders Forum aimed at combating wildlife and forest crime in Nigeria. We have working collaborations with many organizations, especially those ones that are in ports and border posts of the country. Then we have international developed partners that we collaborate with, that UNODC, like US Embassy, and the rest of them. Some of these international developed partners, they assist us in periods we're building capacity, and at the same time, coming up with documents that are strategically developed to combat illegal wildlife and forest crime in Nigeria. They build our capacity in the area of enforcement, investigations, and even the prosecutions to make sure that we are able to curtail these excesses that are coming from scrupulous individuals that want to legally take our resources out of the shore of Nigeria.
Mr. Kolawole Benga Joshua, it's really been a pleasure talking with you, and it's been really enlightening. Thank you for coming on the program. On this edition of Frontiers, we had been taking a look at the illegal wildlife trade and efforts to address the problem in Nigeria. And our guest has been Benga Kolawole, Head Conservation Monitoring, National Environmental Standards and Regulations Enforcement Agency, NESRA. I am Frama Panyi.